Hello friends, Alex Mang here again. Now I'm on the second day at Ignite and I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm Jeff Hollan. So I'm a senior program manager on Azure Functions. I actually get to work with a lot of really cool stuff around building apps in Azure. So obviously I've spent most of my time with Azure Functions, but I also get to work a lot with IoT because we have functions running on IoT devices, and even some of the other services like functions on Kubernetes or on Service Fabric Mesh. So get to play with a lot of stuff, but really focusing on serverless and Azure Functions.
Jeff, you're already very popular when it comes to serverless. And now that you mentioned intelligent edge devices, IoT, Kubernetes, and other things, tell me, how does everything fit in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So serverless is a really exciting new wave that's happening in application development. And there's a few core pieces to serverless. At its core, it means a lot of things. It means I don't have to worry about managing servers anymore. But serverless is also very event-driven. So when you write a serverless app or a serverless function, what you're really doing is you're saying, I want this piece of code to execute off of some event. And maybe that event is somebody buys something at my website or somebody walks into a room. Now, some pieces of the function serverless model can't run everywhere, like the fact that we scale infinitely and all these other fun things. But that programming model, how you think about solving a model, it absolutely does. So when we talk about IoT devices and things like functions, what we're really saying is you have events that are happening on the edge, like a person enters a room or a certain time of day is hit, whatever it might be, and you're going to want to run some code in response to that event. And by giving you the flexibility to write that same function, but then say, you know what, I actually don't need this to run in the cloud. I want this one to run directly on my home security device or directly on top of this machinery inside of a factory. It's the same programming model, it's the same tool set. You're really just changing on where and how it's hosted. So I guess that's kind of how I think about how those fit together, if that makes sense.
Definitely, and I'm extremely impressed by the fact that you've mentioned infinite scale. And you probably have heard so far, and by now, that the amount of data that we generate each day is exponentially growing and keeps on growing. How does a serverless system actually make it so that you can handle all this exponential growth?
Yeah, this is one of the real big motivators that we see people interested in serverless, because to your point, we're in a world today where data is coming from so many different sources, and that data is only growing. And if we had to continually build systems the way we've traditionally built them, we're going to have to triple, quadruple our staff to just deal with the size of the systems, to deal with gigabytes or petabytes of data. And so with serverless, because as you mentioned, the scale's taken care of, it's just a perfect pairing, because it's like, hey, you have a lot of data coming in on who your customers are, what they're interested in, what their behavior is like. And instead of having to build systems to match that scale, now you get to almost scope it down and say, you know what, I just want to know about this piece of data. I want to stream it in real time. I've worked with a lot of customers who they have these massive data lakes and data warehouses, and now they're trying to figure out how to process it. They write a simple Azure function, they connect it to that data source as a trigger, and now as that data comes in, we just elastically scale out to that size of the data. So you don't have to grow your team proportional to the size of data. The serverless piece is able to kind of subsidize that in some ways.
And I want to touch on that point, because serverless, as you mentioned, it's not only a service by itself, it's the integration of all the services that you fit in together, right? It's not only the infrastructure that you no longer have to maintain, it's also the fact that you can integrate with other pieces, part of the application or the solution that you're developing, or thinking about problem solving, so to say, right? Now, on that concept, I'm very curious. We were at this phase way past beyond the early adopters phase for serverless, especially in Azure. What's new in serverless?
Yeah, luckily we do have lots of cool things, and we get to come to Ignite and share some of them. One of the big focuses for the announcements we've been sharing this week are really around, as you said, we're kind of moving past this early adopter, this is new and shiny, to, hey, we need this to be production ready. Like, we have mission critical applications that are highly sensitive and we want to use serverless to power them. How do we do that? So a lot of the new lists we've been shipping is around kind of enterprise grade. So stuff around security. We announced today that we have integration coming so that you can have secrets stored in stuff like Azure Key Vault. So if you have a sensitive piece of data or a connection string or authentication and you need that part of your serverless app, you can now say, hey, just automatically, as you mentioned, serverless is this mesh of services. One of those services can now be Key Vault. One of the other things that we just recently announced is a new type of hosting plan called the Azure Functions Premium plan, which is all the same goodness of the serverless plan. You get to scale out and scale very wide, but now we're giving enterprises more control on saying, you know what, for my functions, I actually want them running in an isolated VM that only my company can use. And I want my functions to have VNet connectivity and running within my express route, or I want them to have massive hardware and I'm going to pay for that hardware. So giving enterprises more options into choosing how they want this function to run and how they want it to live.
That's very impressive. I remember at some point you had a product called Azure Service Runtime, which was under preview. Is that still on the roadmap?
Yeah, Azure Functions Runtime, that's a good question. I think it was last Ignite almost when we announced that in preview. And it was a preview and an experiment in many ways where, as I mentioned, people wanted to bring the program out on premises. It still is in preview. And I would say, honestly, part of the direction we're chewing on right now is we've actually been doing a lot of work over the last few weeks to make deploying to something like Kubernetes really easy for Azure Functions. So if you've used Kubernetes already and you're like, hey, I've got some functions and I have Kubernetes, our tools will actually automatically today allow you to take a function, deploy it to Kubernetes, and have Kubernetes scale it for you. So I guess a long way getting back to your answer, where I think the direction is headed is that this Azure Functions on-premises server runtime will actually probably start to combine with this Kubernetes integration. And if you want to run a full function stack on premises outside of the Azure stack, it would be more this Kubernetes flavored thing, which is also still early, but that's kind of why it's been in preview for a while as we figure out the right way to have an on-premises story that includes scaling, that includes operations and management and all those other necessary pieces.
Definitely. I think that's a very good plan. Personally, that's just my opinion on this one. I think that's a very good plan because thinking about runtime as a system, an underlying system to run your serverless implementations, but on premises, doesn't really make it serverless anymore, right? And on top of that, if you have Premium now as another offering, as another service plan that which you can use, and having Kubernetes integration and so on and so forth, running serverless implementations and applications, that makes it a very, very good broad perspective for many other customers who want to embrace serverless. Where can people learn more about serverless?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of work on some quick start examples. I would say if you've never written an Azure function before or an Azure Logic app, one of my favorite things is there's an online tutorial. Well, actually, the new Microsoft Learn platform has a bunch of these. You can get, I think I heard 700 XP by doing that, so that's a great way to start. But my favorite tutorial is actually one that walks you through step by step on building a serverless website. And we also throw in artificial intelligence in there, so you do image recognition. So if you go check out, it's like build a serverless web app. It'll help you get started and point you to the docs to learn more. That's a really good place to jump off and get your feet wet with some of this new tech.
Yeah, and a big shout out for this one. And I want to point out that serverless is not, it is event driven, right? But it's not only for very small kind of scenarios where you have one thing happening and there is a background process which handles the long-running tasks, so to say. It's even for entire websites, applications, integrations for entire life cycles probably of virtual machine management and whatnot. So you can use serverless for a lot of different tasks. Have you seen at your customers something which stands out as a scenario, as an implementation?
There's a lot of really cool stuff, and people do some very creative things. Just off the top of my head, a few things I thought were cool. Someone posted a blog from Amsterdam actually a few weeks ago where they had a serverless-powered application where you could go take pictures of landmarks around Amsterdam, and it would give you information on them. That was a fun one. We have a lot of people doing high volumes of data processing. The only other one I would call out, it's one of like the largest restaurant chains in the world is using serverless functions so that when you want to buy a gift card, like let's say I want to give you a gift card to this restaurant, I can go open a website, buy the gift card, and then it emails it to you. Well, that's completely powered by serverless behind the scenes, which they love because like come the holiday season where everyone's buying gift cards, their app just automatically scales and handles the load. But you know, if it's January 1st and no one's buying gifts anymore because the gift of whatever, then their app just scales down. So those are a few that I've had a lot of fun working with, and there's a lot more. If you actually go to like the customers page on Microsoft, I think now there's over 60 customer use cases where they're using functions that are published. It's a big number. There's quite a lot
All public,
there.
Everyone
All
can
public,
access them.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Cool
That's
ones.
very cool. Jeff, what are your plans for the rest of Ignite?
It's a busy week, always lots to do. I've got a lot of customers who've made the trip out here to Orlando that I plan to meet with, a few more sessions. One of the fun ones, it's a new area I don't have as much work on, and it's interesting. managing your servers with serverless.
That's cool.
Yeah, so tons of people who are using either virtual machine scale sets or Azure VMs. And we're going to show some cool ways that you can extend those apps and help automate your management of them with serverless things. So like if your virtual machines are about to have some planned maintenance, you can notify a function that can either go scale out a replica or send you an email notification, or functions that analyze your practices to make sure that you have alerts set up for everything, or to make sure that you have everything tagged correctly, and if something's non-compliant, sending a flag or fixing it for you. So some of those interesting things, it's not something I personally, because I mean it's servers and I generally shun them away, but it's been cool working and building out some of those scenarios that we know customers are interested in.
And at the end of the day, it's all about automation, making your life easy and helping you be back home earlier with your friends and family, right?
That's right.
That's very cool. What about the attendee celebration party? Are you attending that one as well?
That is, I have to travel up to Washington, D.C. tomorrow to help at the Spring One conference that's also happening this week. But I specifically said I will only speak at this conference if I can be back here for the attendee celebration, because I missed it last year, and I need me some Harry Potter World. I need me some Diagon Alley. So I will be there. You will probably hear me screaming from the moment it starts until the moment it closes. So I'll see you there too, I'm sure.
Definitely. That will make two of us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Friends, back to you.